Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
I have plenty of questions for you, obviously, on the future of higher education and what are you up to at GreenFig. But I'm quite intrigued by what I read on your bio, and that says you are a wannabe race car driver. So that's where I want to start the conversation. Tell us about your dream career that you're talking about here.
Yeah, it's interesting, Maulik. So I grew up with a mechanic for a father. He was always fixing cars, always had different cars around the house. And I just absolutely fell in love with cars from a really early age, and specifically fast cars that were fun to drive and fun to race around. And it's interesting. When I graduated from college, one of the first, actually the first big purchase I made was a 1996 Harley Davidson. Had an opportunity to ride that for a number of years. Once I had kids, I exchanged that in for a '66 Ford Fairlane. But I've always I love going fast in cars. I've had many occasions to be on a racetrack in NASCARs, or ideally someday maybe in a Formula One car. But just really enjoy the competitive nature of it and kind of living on the edge, if you will. That's probably my most extreme sport.
Something else that's quite fascinating about your background, Sara, is you are a second-team All-American softball player. Tell us a little bit about how softball and your experience there has shaped you as a person, but also as a leader.
Sports in general can teach you so much, especially when you're playing at that really competitive level. I think one is, obviously the perseverance, tenacity, grit. You mentioned the competitiveness, which is definitely a core part of who I am, probably more so than my husband and children would like to admit sometimes. Ultimately, the team component has been one of the most impactful for me. And being able to, understand from a team perspective where gaps exist, how to think about putting different players together to form something that can be incredibly cohesive, and then helping those folks align on the right goals. In this case, maybe it was the right plays, back when I was in college, and to be able to be really authentic with one another, to have each other's backs, which is, part of what baseball or softball is really all about. I think the other thing that's interesting, I was reflecting on this last night, is, when I was talking to my 6-year-old about, his challenges of batting and not always getting hit, the reality is in softball, you're lucky if, 4 times out of 10, you get a base hit. And so 6 times you're failing at bat. And so you learn how to fail. You learn how to deal with failure because it's just a core part of the game. And, I liken that to, so we're a venture-backed company, GreenFig, and I do a lot of pitching to investors. I hear a lot of no's, which are my failures, right? You have to figure out what you did wrong at the at-bat, what you did wrong at the pitch, and come back again, with the right attitude and the right level of confidence. And, that's challenging. But a lot of the skills that I developed definitely helped, and still help me today in terms of the leader I've become.
Now, UNLV that you attended, Sara, great school, but when you arrive in Silicon Valley, you are surrounded by graduates of Stanford and UC Berkeley, USC, and
Harvard.
The graduates of, our Ivy Leagues, right? So did you ever feel insecure or inferior during that process when you were trying to make a career at Silicon Valley? Or because of your competitiveness, you're like, I'm going to go for this and I'm as good as anybody else?
Yeah, my honest answer is I still do, right? There are a lot of folks that have way more education than I do at different. I think UNLV is a pretty great school, and the type of education you get is probably a lot of what also you put into it. But I run across Harvard MBAs, Stanford MBAs. I pitch to them all the time, and it's definitely. There are moments where my imposter syndrome, right, where my insecurities come out. I think the reality is that I am incredibly competitive. I know how to put on my confidence hat, right? And again, that comes from years of playing ball and realizing that the mental game is such a big, important part of confidence and success. And I also just have to sometimes like leave my baggage at the door and realize that we're all people and we all bring completely different skill sets and opportunities to the door. And I may not have the same education layer, but from a life experience perspective, I think I'm doing pretty darn good.
You worked at quite a few companies within the Valley. Any highlights from your perspective?
Probably a really pivotal point in my career was my time at E-Trade. So, E-Trade was a new and fast-growing organization, obviously one of the first online trading platforms available. And, it was rich with funds. We had a CEO that was a complete character. And I had an opportunity to go in there, with probably a couple years of experience. And it was a big company that operated like a startup. And so there were these really unique opportunities to, just dig in and make your mark and continue to grow and realize new opportunity. And, I went in as an individual contributor and walked out, as a director of a part of marketing that I would never thought that I would be managing, where I remember being on the private jet from, DC to Menlo Park with the chief financial officer, this 6-year-old kid, having, great conversations with folks that I never would have expected to. So that, for me, that experience was really a highlight. It was hard, and I worked my tail off. There were a lot of hours that I put into that company. But it was like the pinnacle of Silicon Valley at the time.
And why did you leave?
I left because I had my second son. And the marketing team was based in New York City. They'd hired a fantastic chief marketing officer, and I was doing a ton of traveling. And I woke up one morning, I was actually going to get on a red eye, so it was one evening, and I was really sick to my stomach. And I was talking to my husband, and I canceled my trip at the last minute. It was a leadership meeting, so it was really hard for me to do. And the minute I canceled my trip, I felt better. And so I realized that, I was at a point in, my career meets motherhood where I needed to do something different because I had I think at the time he was like a 2.5 or 3-month-old boy that needed his mom. And so, that's where I took the opportunity to stay local and work for this other small, great company called Yahoo.
Let's talk about your time at Rafter. So as the CEO of the company, you drove a phenomenal growth. From what I gather, you helped some 2.7 million students save some $700 million on textbooks. But eventually, you had to close that company down.
Yeah.
So tell us about that experience and how that has changed you, how that experience has shaped how you look at leadership in your current role.
So, that was one of the best and worst experiences I had in my career. The best because I had a phenomenal team, just this really incredible group of people that some of which work for me today at GreenFig, others that I keep in contact with because we formed such a strong bond. But, we went through hell and back. I stepped into a position where, the organization had raised way too much capital. We were in a point where the growth had stagnated, where the strategy was, the strategy clearly wasn't going to solve. And there was a change, the board asked somebody, there was a change in leadership. I was tapped to step in. And, I didn't know well enough all the questions to ask when I did that. And so, some people say, well, should you have, are you disappointed you made that decision, or was that a bad decision? And, my perspective is life is about learning, right? It's all about experiences. And as long as we take those experiences and we grow from them, then no, it was like an MBA on steroids for me, right? To step in and to have the opportunity to do that. Shutting the organization down was like having a funeral for 10 of my closest family members. I mean, it was absolute torture. And I was very transparent with the entire organization as soon as I knew kind of what was going to transpire, through the process. And, I stood in front of them with my leadership team, and, we kind of locked arms and we cried, and, we answered tough questions, and we hugged with everyone. And, and then after it all happened, we helped everybody get jobs, right? So we turned around and made sure that we were their best advocates, that we could help make connections. And I'll tell you, I think a lot of the leaders in the organization are better for it, and probably a lot of the folks in the folks that ended up, having to leave the organization and find something new. I think that they carried away some really interesting and important things as well. I don't want to go through it again, for sure.
Tell us a little bit about what GreenFig is.
GreenFig is all about helping our university system, specifically here in the U.S. right now, globally, as we grow, bridge the digital skills gap by providing them with industry-focused, technology-focused certification courses. So our core customer is somebody that is likely an adult professional. Our average age is 35. They're looking to reinvent or accelerate their career. Maybe they've been automated out of a job. Maybe they've lost their job because of COVID, and they need to develop new skills that are really reflective of what the modern economy is looking for. And so we develop programs that we distribute completely through our university network. So we've got about 20 university partners today, some really great and fantastic brands, including UNLV. And it affords our learners the opportunity to gain credentials that are recognizable by employers, right? So if I have a digital marketing certificate from University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I've got industry credentials that I can couple together, I'm in a position where I can be really competitive in the market.
The world is obviously changing for the higher education. For countries like US and Australia and UK, higher education is a big source of exports, right? You attract young people from all over the world who come to the US to get a degree. Now that they can do this online, do you think that will change?
Yeah, I think that it's going to balance out, right? We can't discount the experiential nature of being on campus and meeting people and being engulfed in a culture that's not your own, and being able to come to a school in a place like Silicon Valley, right, where you're able to walk on a campus like Google's and grab a bike and ride around. You just can't replace those experiences. And as humans, we need those, right? We thrive on those. And I think that there are absolutely individuals that can thrive without that experience, right? And don't necessarily need that for who they are or what they want to become. Or maybe the experiences are more localized where they can do it, more cost effectively. But I do think it's interesting, a lot of folks will ask me, well, isn't college isn't college going away? Nobody's sending their kids there anymore. And I'm like, well, it's really interesting. Actually, it's still a really important aspect of of what people are doing. And for a very large part of our population, it is the right choice for them to have better social mobility, period, end of story. The data says it. I think the challenge that we've run into is we've tried to put too many folks that aren't ready for a higher education experience, whether it's now or 10 years from now. We've got to be able to, they've got to be able to make different and better decisions. And I think, frankly, the alternatives are there now, right? So for that person that doesn't necessarily want to spend $25,000, $50,000 a year. I mean, it goes up higher. They can go to a boot camp or an experiential learning program like GreenFig's, but it doesn't replace all of the other components, right, that they're going to learn as part of that university experience.